Hi there, and welcome back to part two of the fall of the House of Usher. Now, one of the things that I don't think I mentioned earlier is that, in ways similar to Jonathan Irving, this short story is lush with sensory description. In fact, it's overwhelming, and you could almost say that the atmosphere is its own character, right? All of the background, the discussion of how things look, how they sound, how they feel, how they smell, and again, this is, like I said, reminiscent of what Washington Irving did as well. So part of it is just the style of the journey, that almost sensory overload. And again, this is a romanticist notion. It's about being washed over, either in a good way, like it with awe or with the sublime, or in a negative way with horror, terror, repulsion, revulsion rather. Now, there's a really interesting passage on page 634, um, that first full paragraph, about a painting up in the wall. Um, and this is the excerpt that describes the painting. One of the phantasmagoric conceptions of my friend, partaking not so rigidly of the spirit of abstraction, may be shadowed forth, look at that wording, although feebly in words. A small picture presented the interior of an immensely long and rectangular vault or tunnel, with low walls, smooth, white, and without interruption or device. Certain accessory points of the design served well to convey the idea that this excavation lay at an exceeding depth below the surface of the earth. No outlet was observed in any portion of its vast extent, and no torch or other artificial source of light was discernible, yet a flood of intense rays rolled throughout, and bathed the whole in a ghastly and inappropriate splendor. So, one of the things that we see a lot in romanticism, especially in dark romanticism, is strong symbolism. Now, if we think about how this painting might look, it's this long corridor, that's got no windows, no doors, or anything like that. But there's all of this light radiating out of it from somewhere, but we just don't know where. And it's talked about it being subterranean, so underground, right? Now, what might this mean in relationship to the rest of the story? Well, if we go into psychoanalytical criticism and think about this as the unconscious, which is so important, like I've said before, to romanticism and dark romanticism. All those buried thoughts that are not socially appropriate, those desires, those drives, um, those irrational fears, all those things that try to be kept down by our conscious, they just keep bursting forth with energy. They're pulsating with a life of their own. And again, this is kind of like dark romanticism all over the place. All of this power from within. So we have that. And if we look on page 636, we've got that large full paragraph, and we're looking right about there. I don't know if you really want to see me do that or not. Where the narrator talks about gradual yet certain condensation of an atmosphere of their own about the waters and walls. Okay? So, in other words, they're sweating or crying or something like that. There's almost this physiological reaction to it. And here's another element that we sometimes see in dark romanticism, horror, etc. Things that are not alive seem to be alive. There's this sense that they are animated by some kind of force. Like the house is possessed with some kind of unearthly life or a soul. And the Latin word that we have for soul, animus, right? We see in words like, say, animate. Um, so there is this sense that the house is animated on its own, that is doing living things as a living creature. I think I'm getting pretty close to all I want to say about this. Um, It's such a great story to look at line by line. Um, how does the narrator try to calm Roderick's nerves? By reading him this old medieval tale, um, the Mad Tryst of Sir Lancelot Canning, one of the favorites of Usher's. Then the champion is Ethelred. Now that's an Anglo-Saxon name. For those of you who have taken, first semester Brit-Lit, I believe that's ADA, and you know a little bit about how their naming system works. Athel was a really important element in names. It means noble, like a prince in Anglo-Saxon is um, an atheling. So this too is one of the elements of Romanticism or Dark Romanticism, going back to an earlier time. I mean, going back even further than medieval, to that early medieval Anglo-Saxon period. And that is something that is very, very appealing to Romanticists. It's very, very old. Now, of course, things don't go the way they should. The more he reads the story, the more he seems to hear sounds that are actually paralleling what's going on in the story. And at this point, we as the reader have to ask ourselves, is this really happening? Or is this some kind of manifestation, some possession in the narrator's mind? Or is it something on the outside? In other words, is it subjective reality in his head, or is it objective reality outside? And that's at the crux of most dark romanticism, most Gothicism, and most horror. Is it real to the outside world? Is the outside world possessed and insane, or is it only real in the inside world? And is it only the inside world that is possessed and insane? And of course, things don't go well. He flees the castle, or the mansion rather. This is on the bottom, page 641. Um, and of course, that's after he sees Madeline, who's not really dead, come forward and start strangling Roderick. Very last paragraph, bottom 641. From that chamber and from that mansion I fled aghast. The storm was still abroad in all its wrath, and as I found myself crossing the old causeway, suddenly there shot along the path a wild light. There we have that wild light. Where's it coming from? What's the source of the energy? And I turned to see whence a gleam so unusual could have issued, for the vast house and its shadows were alone behind me. Again, where is this light coming from? The radiance was that of the full setting and blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through the once barely discernible fissure which I have spoken, as extending from the roof of the building in a zigzag direction to the base. So, in other words, this weird, unearthly, like blood red light is coming through this fissure. The fact that there's like that fissure or that crack in the mansion to begin with says something about, the house of Usher. House also means the family of Usher, right? Being torn apart, being split in two. While I gazed, this fissure rapidly widened. There came a fierce breath of the whirlwind. The entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled as I saw the mighty walls rushing asunder. So now the whole house is collapsing. It's just collapsing in this blood red light. There was a long, tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters, and the deep and dank tarn at my feet closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. We have the vision of this house collapsing in upon itself, and the sentiment of the family, its degenerative and decadent influences, finally causing the house and the family to crumble and implode and fall into this dank old pond. Now, If we want to talk about symbolism a little bit there, the house is also the family. Um, it's also about the split of uh, Roderick and Madeline causing an implosion too. You could read it, and if you think about it, there's a certain like unnatural energy that is suggested between um, Roderick and Madeline. We talked about that a little bit earlier with that very narrow family tree. So this is one way of closing it up. And so there is some punishment, but for these people who were too in love with their senses, that were too deep into sensation in one ways. I'm not saying it's necessarily a tale of incest or something like that, but of an unnatural relationship with the senses and with the spirit. And that's really that dark warping of romanticism, which is all about this divine and transcendent feeling, um, uh, and in transcendentalism too, this divine and transcendentalist uh, feeling and sentiment about the relationship of nature and the relationship of people to other people, the relationship of all of this to the divine. And if we want to think about this iconography of the house imploding, think about how it's been used so much in contemporary culture, especially in film, especially in horror film. If you look at the end of Steven Spielberg's Poltergeist, what happens to that house? It completely crumples upon itself. Um, and that's part of the payment for building on top of a Native American burial ground. Again, you can feel the dark romanticism in there too. The other really fantastic example is the end of Carrie. If you've never seen the original Carrie by Brian De Palma, that is one creepy movie. Um, Fantastic cast, and it's definitely got supernatural in it, and it's got a really conflicted heroine that you want to like, but leaves you standoffish in some kind of ways. And two, that house burns again at the very end and comes down too. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. That's really all I have to say about Poe and about Fall of the House of Usher. But again, I think it's probably the best, fullest example we're going to have of dark romanticism and all of its potential during the semester. So I hope you enjoyed it.